Привіт всім! Раді вас вітати на освітній програмі The Black Box від Jam Factory арт-центру. Моє ім'я Артем Бусик. Забув сказати на початку. Цьогоріч театр «Нафта», Харківський театр «Нафта» є партнерами цієї освітньої програми, і ми є представниками театру «Нафта». І в цьому році програма реалізується в 3 містах. Це Харків, Львів і Київ. В Харкові ми вже провели робочу сесію. Може, хтось з вас був? Хтось був? Точно, дякую, супер. І ми раді бути тут, сьогодні у Львові. І ця програма в цьому році відрізняється від попередніх, що ми більше зробили акцент на більш практичні воркшопи, тренінги для практиків і практикінь театру. Але також у нас відбуваються і лекції, як, наприклад, ця. Передаю слово Ніні.
Дуже дякую, Артеме. Мене звуть Ніна Хижина, я є співкураторкою цьогорічної едиції The Black Box. І для нас це велика радість і честь цього року бути партнерами цієї програми. Я скажу кілька слів про концепцію цьогорічної едиції. Коли ми роздумували про те, що є актуальним для нас, як для митців-мисткинь, в просторі українського мистецтва, то ми зіштовхнулися з певною напругою, яка існує між нашим відчуттям відповідальності як громадян і митців, такої необхідності документувати реальність, переповідати досвіди, вдивлятися критичним оком в соціополітичний контекст, в якому ми є, вдивлятися в наші рани, вдивлятися в ці пустки, що утворюються на місцях прильотів, і, власне, займатися мистецтвом, що є соціально відповідальним, політичним і відважним, і критичним. І також паралельно з цим ми маємо дуже просту потребу в ескапізмі, в такій собі мистецькій втечі, в тому, щоб робити, створювати фікційні світи, створювати паралельні реальності, створювати такі собі розломи в цій реальності, такі місця всередині наших міст, де ми можемо заховатися, відпочити, зробити вдих-видих, набиратися ресурсу і просто побути рефлексуючими і живими, і вразливими. І якби на перетині цих двох потреб ми віднайшли для себе, є таким для мене контроверсією, як дієва надія. В принципі, надія є таким для мене контроверсійним концептом і непростою темою, з якою ми працюємо. І тому ми додали цей елемент, власне, дієвості, тобто тих маленьких кроків, дуже практичних речей, які ми робимо щодня на шляху до реалізації, власне, нашої надії. І наша з вами зустріч є одним з таких кроків, за що я вам і дякую. І я передаю слово Любі Ільницькій.
Дякую, доброго вечора. Я маю приємність курувати театральну програму Jam Factory арт-центр і працювати тут, і в цьому році і завжди з радістю співпрацювати з театром «Нафта». І сьогодні ми маємо особливого гостя і спікера. І я дуже рада представити сьогодні Аліна Уберті, театрального кінорежисера, драматурга з Румунії. Алін зараз також розпочав роботу в Jam Factory арт-центр над новою постановкою, прем'єра якої відбудеться наприкінці червня, на яку теж заздалегідь вас запрошую. І хочу вас попросити, тих, хто потребують перекладу з англійської на українську, хто ще не взяли собі навушники, ви можете ще це зробити. Якщо під час лекції у вас стануться якісь технічні неполадки з перекладом, підніміть руку, до вас підійдуть і налагодять для вас навушник. Наприкінці лекції відбудеться сесія запитань-відповідей. Якщо ви хочете поставити запитання, будь ласка, підніміть руку, я підійду до вас з мікрофоном. Це дуже важливо, щоб ви говорили запитання у мікрофон. тому що тоді його буде чути перекладач і перекладе його для Аліни англійською мовою. Тобто все, що ви скажете не в мікрофон, на жаль, не буде перекладено і почуто. Це з таких технічних речей на сьогодні все. Я дуже рада бачити сьогодні так багато людей, дуже рада бачити учасників-учасниць наших практичних воркшопів. І відчуваю велике натхнення від такої кількості уваги, інтересу практиків, практикинь, особливо незалежного сектору до цих подій. І бажаю нам натхненного продовження цієї програми, яку ми сьогодні розпочали вранці. На все добре. Ми починаємо.
Hi. Привіт. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you. I have no idea what I'm doing. You should know that beforehand. This is the first time and I'm a bit nervous. I have notes with me in case I forget what I want to say. But the point of having no idea what you're doing is, I think, a good starting point for the discussion that I want to have today with you, because we're talking about devising theater. And I think the main difference between a conventional theater process, where you know the text before starting on rehearsing and on the performance you're working for, is that in devising theater, you have no idea what you're doing when you start with your team. And you have to get accustomed, and you have to get comfortable with this state of constant confusion and of having absolutely no idea what you're doing, which is also something that I'm doing right now while talking to so many people that are staring at me. So this is how I would like to start. I'd like to start talking about how do we get accustomed to this state of having absolutely no idea what we're doing when we start working on a project, on a theatrical project. Because we start without foundation. Text is a very good foundation. Whenever you feel lost, whenever you feel confused in rehearsals, you just come back to the text, and there's answers there. Even if you don't feel satisfied with the answers that you have, you still have the answers there. If you start rehearsing, you start working for a theatrical project without having a text, you need a new sort of foundation. You need a different starting point. And this is, for me, this is the team. This is the collective that you're working with. The difference, I think, the main difference between working from a text that already exists is you start from, let's say, the brain. It's a theater that starts from a text that already exists is the theater of the director. Director is the one that has the most power when they work in a team. Theater that starts without text, devising theater, is not a theater of the brain. It's a theater of the organs, which is a term I have personally invented. I like it very much, and we'll talk about it a bit later. When I say theater of the organs, I don't mean, I mean a theater of the body, a theater of the entire team, a theater that belongs to everyone equally, or not maybe not 100% equally, but way more than it belongs to a conventional process where director already knows a lot of the stuff that the other team doesn't know when starting work on a project. I also have a clicker, which I will use now. This is the first, this is the foundation, this is the starting point that I was talking about earlier. When working in a devising performance, we're not working with a text. There's a lot of ways that you can do devising theater. More than I know of, honestly. I don't have all the knowledge of devising theater processes. So, and we don't even have the time for me to say all of them, but I'll say the ones that I know about, which are either we start all writing, everyone from the team, set designer, actors, choreographer, musician, director, everyone writes. Maybe it's coordinated by someone, usually by a dramaturg, but that's the one common starting point. That's how I usually work when I work with my collective in back home in Bucharest, in Romania. Or you can start just improvising first from certain points. You agree on a theme, let's say, and this is something we'll also later talk about. You agree on a theme, and then you start improvising from that theme to set up a foundation of what you're going to be rehearsing. And this is why this chapter is called Collective Personality. Because I think when you start without a text, you need to make a team in which you have a lot of trust. And I think this is the most important part of starting work in a process like this. And making a team depends on a lot. I mean, it depends a lot, because if you make a team to make only one performance, so this collective will only exist for, let's say, 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, or you make a collective and you aim for it to exist for as long a period of time as possible, there's a lot of nuances that we have to take into account when making a team. But usually when you have to decide who you're going to be working with, I think the most important decision is something that's not rationally calculated. It's something that's not, it cannot be taught in schools the way maybe theater schools teach directors or directing students to pick actors based on how they look or what energy they have. If you want to cast a bad guy, you'll automatically cast someone that maybe looks like me. They're always frowning. They're big. They look threatening. And that's fine. You can do that. But in a conventional theater process, in a devising theater process, we don't know how I keep repeating myself about this. We have no idea what we're doing. So we have to follow our intuition when making a team. We have to follow our feeling in regards to the personality of the person that's in front of us. And there's a lot of time where we don't have the resources, the temporal resources to do that. There's a lot of time where you have maybe 1 week to form a team. Maybe you have 2 weeks to form a team. So that's why you look at a person, you have to sort of decide if that person feels right for you or if they don't feel right for you. And this is something that director Katie Mitchell calls soft skills. She makes this difference between soft skills and hard skills. And hard skills are like usual creative tools that a director needs, like building a scene, finding a concept, working with actors, working with a set designer. And that's hard skills. And then there's soft skills, which is knowing who to cast together. Maybe someone just went through a divorce. They're a couple and they went through a divorce. And you're not going to cast them together in the same performance because it's going to be much more difficult to work with those people. Soft skills are a bit more political than hard skills. But I think, or maybe, I don't know the situation, how it is in Ukraine, but in Romania, in schools and institutions where you go to learn how to make theater, people don't tell you about these soft skills that Katie Mitchell talks about. And I think generally it's something that's very often overlooked. And it's not necessarily overlooked because it's not taught. It's overlooked because we are used to the idea that an artist can be an awful person if they're a brilliant artist, if they have brilliant personality. But then they make very questionable decisions, or then they make, like they have awful behavior in rehearsals. And the truth is, and maybe there's people who already know this, maybe there's people who don't know this, but the truth is, having brilliance on stage or off stage is no excuse to make other people suffer or to make yourself suffer. Usually, I think that's something that's very ignored. Usually, I think we look at artists that we admire. Sometimes that happens to me a lot. I find out personal details about artists that I like, and then I'm very disappointed, and I don't like them anymore because they end up being horrible people. And this, I think, is not just because of it's because of an entire system. It's not that entirely that person's fault. Of course, every person should be held accountable for their actions. But the system, the structures that we work in, they still reward quality, like aesthetic quality over moral quality. But in theater, maybe, of course, sure, you can be a painter, and you can be an awful person. It's still not excusable to be an awful person, be a painter, but at least you work in your studio all day and you don't interact with so many people. But theater is a social art, and theater is an art where it's very rarely you can do it by yourself. You can be Angelica Lidl and just write and direct and make the set design and act in your own performances, but usually we depend on other people, especially directors. I'm the weakest person in a theater team, actually. I have a set designer. He's here, actually. Cosmin Stanko is a very talented person. And he has concrete ways of expressing himself. There's actors that I work with, and they have concrete ways of expressing themselves. There's choreographers, and so on and so forth. And everyone has a concrete way of expressing themselves, except for me. I depend on a lot of other people to propose an experience to the audience. But usually directors are people who are obsessed with powers. I think this is a vocation that attracts people who have a lot of a very weird relationship with power. And we think we're powerful people. Even now, I'm a director. I sit on a podium. I have a microphone. And there's a lot of people looking at me and assuming somehow that I know more than they do. But if I was here by myself speaking into a microphone, it would be like extremely weird for myself. So it's actually the other way around. And this is, again, another argument that I want to give towards the theater of the organs that I will be speaking about soon. But before making this argument about theater of the organs, we need to understand, and I cannot stress this enough, the importance of these soft skills, the importance of carefully picking who you work with. A system where there's reward and there's punishment is not, in my opinion, it's not a working system. But I don't think we can get to that system without taking certain steps towards having an artistic world where we don't reward or punish behavior. And those steps mean rewarding healthy behavior in rehearsals and punishing unhealthy behavior in rehearsals. That doesn't mean excluding people from working. Anyone can work in the system, imaginary system I'm proposing to you right now. Anyone would have just as much as work as they would in this system that we have now, but they would just be kind of forced to learn how to express and control the problems that happen in rehearsal. Because if there's theater makers in the audience, you know, any project comes with frustration, and any project comes with anger, any project comes with sacrifice and with tiredness, with a lot of tiredness. And these things are okay to happen. They will never go away, but we can learn how to express these things in a different manner, in a manner that doesn't hurt people. When I was a student, I always heard about brilliant directors, international or like national directors, and they were brilliant. And then you found out how they acted in rehearsals with their team. And even my professor, and my professor is one of the best professors in theater education in Romania. And if I would describe him to you, he would sound like a great person. He works with a lot of vulnerable groups. His theater in Bucharest in Romania is the only theater that has free entry, because they have this very, very nice and coherent theory about culture that should be free for everyone. So it's like, this person sounds like a good person, but the truth is, in class, when he was teaching, he was an awful person, and he didn't know how to express his feelings and didn't know how to control his anger. And he would systematically destroy your self-esteem until you could not trust your own instincts or opinions anymore. And if you started crying, it would got even worse. So we would usually do was I would go hide in the bathroom to cry and come back to class after I was finished. And then during these times when I was studying, I had this question. I don't scream in rehearsals. I'm not a violin director. Am I bad? Am I a bad director? Will I ever be as good as these horrible people? Because critics love them, audience loved them. And no, the question, I mean, I'm assuming the answer is obvious. But if there's people who have this thought, if there's students who have this thought, I want to assure everyone that it doesn't matter how horrible of a person you are with the quality of the performance that you make. The performance can be brilliant, but you're still an awful person, and you don't have to be an awful person to be a very good artist. Especially, again, in a social art like theater is, where we depend on other people and we depend on healthily interacting with a lot of people. My mouth is very dry. I'll drink some water now. I spoke actually more than I assumed I will. Are there students? Do we have students in the audience? Can we have like a show of hands? Okay. And do we? Is it art school, like a theater school? Okay. I'm very happy. This is my favorite moment in the lecture. Because in this lecture, I insist a lot on things that are very hard to quantify. On like soft skills, how to form a team, but basically what I said about forming a team is just trust your intuition, trust the personality of the person you're speaking to. And these are things that are they're not concrete at all, and it's very hard to use them. But there's one truth that art school will never teach you how to make art. And this is something that all students should understand. There's a difference between craft and art. You have craft, which is like being on stage and speaking clearly to an audience, speaking loud enough so that everyone in the auditorium can hear you. And then there's art, like, I don't know, building a role, finding a really interesting concept for a performance. And maybe there's, I don't know, maybe out there somewhere in the world there are schools that can do this, but in my experience, and not just mine, most art schools don't make you an artist. But most professors will not tell you this. Professors have to justify their salaries. Universities have to justify their existence. So they will give you like a concrete set of tools. But the thing about those tools are they have existed for a long, long time. They're proven that they're working. We know that these tools work, but we know that these tools work because they're very old. Nothing new comes from institutions. If we look at like the history of art, like I'll use examples from painting, but I think it's the same thing. We look at Impressionists, and Impressionists were artists who were ignored by the institutions that were important when they were painting. They actually started their own exhibition because no one was exposing their works. No one was showing their... It was a bad way to describe the art. That the word Impressionism was something that it was a bad word. It was a bad way to describe the art that they were making. Now, in arts history schools, we learn about Impressionists as a valuable movement. And these teachers, these professors, they teach about Impressionism. They know this example in history, but when you try to do something new, they will tell you it's not possible. They will tell you to listen to the rules that they're teaching you, but the truth is, there are no rules. You just have to follow your intuition and just hope for the best. Sometimes you follow your intuition and everything works really good. Sometimes you follow your intuition and everything is really bad. But at least you know you tried something new. And young people, this is why I'm speaking to the students with this part. Our responsibility right now in the world is to make new things. At some point, we will also get old, and that's okay. and we will start speaking about tools that we have proven that work, but those tools will be old. And then we should be wise enough to let new young people come and contradict us and make new things. And this was my fuck school intermission. Thank you. Okay, so we have a team. We want to make a devised performance. We made a team. We use the soft skills, and now we start working. I think the most general questions people in a devised process ask themselves is, what do we make this performance about? And this is a question that's very frustrating to me, for reasons I will explain now. Because this is even a question, it's a question people ask even when you say you saw a film or you saw a performance made by someone else, or you read a book. First question someone asks, if they care, is, what is it about? And the answer is short summary of the story. Like if I say I saw Romeo and Juliet, people will ask, oh, and what is it about? I mean, I don't know. Someone who has no access to culture or internet will ask what Romeo and Juliet is about. But the answer will be, Romeo and Juliet is about two lovers from rivaling families. But this is a confusion I think is often made in between subject and story and theme. The story is two lovers from rivaling families. The theme is, well, you can decide what the theme is, but let's say the theme is political rivalry between two opposing families can cause unforgivable damage to a community. And that is the theme. And the subject of Romeo and Juliet is also separate from these other two points. That's love. But you cannot say I'm making a performance about love, because that's too loose of a theme. It's the Beauty and the Beast is also about love, but it's spoken about in very different terms than Romeo and Juliet. So usually when we start working on a performance, on a devised performance, we say, okay, we want to make a performance about something. But I think making a performance about something in the way I just described, even if you properly decide on a theme that you want to speak about, I think that limits a lot on what the performance could be, and not in a good way. There's this essay written by Susan Sontag, a very good essay. I recommend it to everyone if you haven't read it already. It's called Against Interpretation. And in Against Interpretation, Susan Sontag basically says, first human experience of art was cave painting. And the first theory of art of humans was Plato. And Plato said art is impure because it's a representation of something that's already a representation, so it's a copy of a copy, so it's very impure. So it makes no sense to make it. And ever since that theory, a long time ago, appeared, we have been constantly looking for ways to justify the existence of art, to give value to it. And that's when then this dichotomy of content and form appeared. We look at a performance and we kind of try to isolate the message of that performance and the way that message is said. But Susan Sontag in that essay, and she describes it and argues it better than I am doing now, she explains that the way that you speak about something is the message itself. You cannot separate these things. So usually if you start working on a devising performance, which I encourage you to do if you haven't tried already, it's a great process. If you start working on a devising performance, maybe instead of asking, okay, what do we make this performance about, we ask, what do we want this performance to achieve? Or what do I want people to feel when they come see my performance? Or what do I want the performance to do for the audience? I can make a performance to make people feel loved. I can make a performance to empower people. I can make performance to make people question opinion that they might have. And I think this is much more significant. And this is also better fuel for when you're working. Because usually, for me, this is the way it works. Usually, we start rehearsals, and somewhere in the middle, I lose sense, and I don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if the answer that you gave yourself with that question, why, or what do I want people to feel, what do I want this performance to do, that answer, you just kind of return back to it. Anytime that you're lost, you return to that answer, and it starts making sense, or at least the decisions that you have to make become a bit more clear when you have to make those decisions, because you know something common in between everyone that's on the team. But it's very important to agree on this with everyone. It's also very important to know who you're making the performance for. It can be for critics, and that's perfectly fine. You can do theater to get awards. It's okay. You can do it for your local audience. You can do it for an audience of a city or a country you've never been to before. Any answer, I think, is okay, as long as it's for someone else. I think art and theater in particular, because it's something that depends not on just like, it's not social only in the working process, it's social also in the way that we present it, has to be treated and thought of as a gift. Even if that gift is sad or weird, it's still supposed to be for someone else. It's still supposed to be about someone else. And when you decide who your audience is, or who you want your audience to be, you know who you're working for. You know what you're working for. These are two fundamental questions. I don't think just necessarily for devised performances, but we're speaking about devising theater right now. So these are the two fundamental questions that devised performances and devised performance should ask themselves. What do I want to achieve with this performance, and who am I making the performance for? We always feel this. As audience members, we feel this. We feel if even if the performance can be extremely good, it can be brilliant, but you still feel that something's incomplete, and the performance was finished, we go outside, we start smoking, and instantly we start talking about what we saw. And that, for me, is a sign of incomplete performance. When the performance is extremely good, and I think everyone can agree with me, when performance is extremely good, you need at least 5 minutes to be quiet, to think of what just happened to you, and then, sure, you can start giving an opinion. But no matter how well-crafted a performance can be, if it's made with like self-obsession and anger and hatred, that performance will be felt as being made with these things. Even if audience, I'm not saying audience members will leave the performance and say, I think this performance was made with very much anger. It's something that I think we feel unconsciously. And this doesn't work, again, it's not something that works only for devising theater. It can work even for a film. It can work even for a book. The intention that you have when you work on something is something that will definitely be felt by the audience that you intend to have. I kept mentioning this theater of the organs, and now we'll also finally speak about it. I mentioned in the beginning that a conventional theater process is a theater that is done from the brain. A theater that is done and kind of coordinated mostly by the director. That's, again, when I know I have, me as a director, I have time to go home and to read the text for 2 months and to work with the set designer for 2 months and to know everything before starting rehearsals. And that's when, sure, the process can function as a theater of the brain. But again, we're speaking of a process where we have no idea what we're doing, and that means director as well. So the usual imposing of a creative direction that director has is not present anymore. And the question, and this is a question I have asked myself a long time, is what am I valuable for as a director in this process if I don't know, if I didn't do my homework? There's no homework to do yet. So what can I help this process with? And I would refer to this book. It's a very complicated book. I don't think I understood all of it. I like it very much. It's called Nietzsche and the Vicious Cycle. It's written by French philosopher Pierre Klosowski. And in that book, he develops this idea that the brain tricks itself and other organs that it is the leader of the body, when truthfully the brain depends on all other organs for the body to function. And this is something that I spoke earlier as well. Like me as a director, I depend on everyone else in the team more than they depend on me. You can make a performance without a director, but a director cannot make a performance without anyone else. Except for, again, there's few exceptions. So instead of having the lead, and instead of deciding 100% what will happen and how it will happen in this theater of the organs that devising theater means, I think what a director's job is to work with creative impulses that come from the rest of the team. The rest of the team makes the proposals. The rest of the team decides what a scene should be like. There's a lot of scenes, and a bit later, I don't know how much time passed. We still have time. A bit later, I'll talk about 2 performances that I've made. And one of them, which is a good example, I have a bad example and I have a good example. And the good example has entire scenes that were not made by myself. I had no idea how to make those scenes, and actors chose the direction, and it was direction that was much better than what I could possibly imagine. And this is because me as a director in devising theater process, I have the tools that a director usually has, so I can understand, for example, semiotic choices. I can understand what something can mean in a broader scheme, but the impulse comes from someone else. So I take that impulse and I try to give it coherence, and I try to give it relevance. I try to make it shine more. This theater of the organs that I'm speaking about is the theater where the entire team is in the spotlight. Because usually if we think of artists, unless there's a collective and it's intentionally named a collective, like the Need Company, for example, Shishi Pop, Forced Entertainment, but those are separate examples. Most of the time, we think of the director, and we say this was a performance done by X, but it actually was a performance done by a lot of people. So I think confusing myself with my tools, and this works for humanity as well, not just theater at this point, if I confuse my thinking with myself, if I confuse my ideas with my own identity, I become very attached to them. And it's very hard for me to accept that maybe other ideas in a working process can be better, healthier, or more valuable for the performance that we're making. But this is where the previous chapter that I was speaking about comes into play, and that's collective personality. Because if we have a collective personality and we use all these soft skills and we're all trying to establish a healthy working environment, then I'm also responsible for the way my colleagues are acting. I'm also responsible for the behavior that these people have, and I'm obliged, I have this responsibility to act when things are not going well. And that includes a team telling the director an idea is not good, a behavior is not working. Another point, I think, another direction I think director in devising theater can provide. Another form of assistance a director can assist with is at the end, because when we have creative impulses, we don't fully understand them. Of course, we find meaning for them at the end. I have a proposal that I make, and then at the end, I look at that proposal that I made while rehearsing, and I realize that proposal is valuable. But we shouldn't act like the impulse comes with the meaning. The impulse comes from somewhere from, let's say, the stomach. It comes from somewhere where we don't exactly explain or control how creativity works. A director, I think, what should do in contexts like these, in devised theater performance contexts, is analyzing at the end of working on a scene, at the end of rehearsal day and after the premiere, is analyzing exactly what the meaning behind the decisions that we made was and why they're valuable and why they're working. Maybe try to work on them for future performance if the collective that we made together intends to exist for a longer time. But this is, again, this comes after an impulse exists. So the first action, the first movement does not come from what's usually seen as the leader. I think I'm speaking very theoretically, and one frustration I usually have about lectures and about workshops is, especially when I was a student, I wanted to understand concrete decisions that I should make. People were speaking about philosophy, and I had to understand how to explain to an actor how to enter on stage without looking weird. But again, this is a different process we're talking about, where a lot of things just happen from trusting yourself and trusting the team that you're with. But I think there's some things that we can foresee, which are limitations. And there's limitations that we can imagine now, which are usual limitations with time, money, technical issues, creative disagreements. And there are limitations that are unforeseeable, and we don't know what they will be unless they happen. And I don't think there's a concrete, honest answer that I can give about how to fix these limitations. I think the way you can work, what helped me at least, is try not to hide this limitation. Try not to make this limitation not look like what it is, which is a limitation. Try to own it and display it and be proud of it. So, for example, at some point I had to make a performance with Romanian and Hungarian speakers. And there was a moment in the performance, it was a very important moment in the performance, where Romanians had to speak Hungarian. And they couldn't do it. It was very bad. Their pronunciation was awful. But while we had a break from rehearsals and they were trying, the Romanians went to the Hungarians and they said, "Can you tell me that phrase again? I'm trying to understand how to pronounce it." And the way the Hungarians were helping Romanians pronounce those words was beautiful. And the decision, and I'm proud of that decision that I made, was having this moment happen on stage in real time. So instead of having Romanian actors perfectly speak a language that they obviously don't understand, you had Romanian actors struggling to learn a language on stage while our audience was looking. And it was a moment where a limitation turned into a beautiful and meaningful moment. And I think, again, this is not a universal rule. It cannot always work. And I don't want to be responsible for any mistakes anyone makes, if you take my word for this. But there are a lot of times when you have something that's not working, and instead of trying to make that thing work, you can just own that and turn it into something that you use, and turn it into your tool. And that's where we find freedom. That's why this lecture, and that's why that title is called Freedom and Soap. Soap is about hygiene and how we work in collectives in a healthy way, and freedom is about how we don't let these limitations control how creative we can be. And usually, in my experience, as many limitations as you have, the more creative you get. It's very hard to understand that, and I don't want you to think that I'm extremely wise, and when I rehearse, I don't get extremely frustrated about limitations that I have. But usually, if you remind yourself that you can use this obstacle in your advantage, something beautiful can happen which was not planned in advance. I'm actually finished with my notes. I like to speak about 2 examples. From my experience, I'm not pretending I'm a brilliant director. I'm speaking from my experience because it's the easiest way I can give examples that I very well know of. And I'd like to speak about a very good working example that I had, and a very bad working example that I had. It's with the same team. I have a small collective in Bucharest in Romania. We don't have a name because I have a superstition that if we have a name, people will stop coming to rehearse with me. So we have no name. And we worked on few performances. One of them is amazing performance, and the other one is remembered as being a very bad experience because we did not know how to apply these soft skills I was speaking about earlier. Do you want me to move so that you see better pictures, because we're about to look at pictures? Is this okay? Okay. These are the actors in the collective. That's Maria Moroshan, that's Bogdan Iancu, the one going like this with his hand is Vlad Pânzaru, and the one that's too busy being on his phone is Tiberiu Zavelea. And this is me and my best friend and dramaturg, Alexandru Ivanoiu. And these are just pictures from the performance. It's a performance that we made on the roof of the Museum of National Contemporary Art in Bucharest in Romania. The performance is entitled Câini versus Uranus. In Romanian, câini means dogs. So it's basically dogs versus Uranus. Uranus, I'm giving as little context as I can, but there's some things you have to know for the discussion to make sense. Uranus used to be a very beautiful neighborhood in Bucharest, Romania. I think it was the most beautiful neighborhood that we had in Bucharest, in Romania, and it was torn down by the communist regime. My mother lived in that neighborhood when she was a child. I never saw that. I was born after the communist regime fell, but I never saw that neighborhood. I only saw pictures of it. Communist regime, after they tore down the neighborhood, they built, I don't have a picture of it from outside, they built the ugliest building in Europe, the Palace of the Parliament, which still exists, and which is it's situated exactly on top of the street that gave the neighborhood its name, Uranus. It used to be Uranus Street. And this performance exists because entirely of unconscious and unexplainable reasons. I quit theater. I didn't want to make theater anymore. I was very depressed. I said it's a horrible thing to do. And one of the actors had a dream about me, and they called me and they said, I had a dream that we're working on a performance together. Let's work on a performance together. And I said, okay, but I won't choose any actors. You choose whoever you want to. I'm just doing it for fun. I don't want money. I don't want anything. So he chose the other 3, which are his classmates from university. They studied together. And this is a huge advantage that we had in rehearsal because of what I was speaking about earlier, like collective personality. They know each other very well. They can work with each other very well. They have very good chemistry. And that is, you can feel that in rehearsals, and also when you look at rehearsal. When you rehearse with them, you see how good they function with each other. And we started working on this performance. We had no idea what the performance will be about. I called my friend, I showed you a picture of him earlier, Alexandru Ivanoiu. He's a playwright, and he started coordinating a few writing exercises with us. But we were writing about anything. We had no idea what we were doing. And at some point, money showed up. Someone called me and told me they're organizing like a festival and they want me to make a small performance, and told me to find a team. And I said, I already have a team. We're already working on something. And they said, okay, but it has to be about a neighborhood in Bucharest. So I said, perfect. My mother lived in Oranus. This is a thing that interests me. I want to make a performance with that. And I told them, and they said, okay, we'll make a performance about Oranus. But then my friend, the dramaturg, said he wants to make a performance about dogs. So I said, okay, we make also a performance about dogs. And then we started just adding what each of us wanted to have in a performance. This was not in any way planned or worked on as a performance the way we get taught in schools. I had absolutely no reason for any decision that I made, and neither did them. We simply, at some point someone said, I want to have a scene where we all dance with the audience, and we made a scene where everyone dances with the audience. So the performance is basically a postmodern collage. There's scenes. If I describe them to you, you won't really understand how they work next to each other, and it might seem they're a bit random, but I think there's one common thing. Every character in every scene that we are playing in this performance is a character that has they don't belong anywhere. And they're always in sort of a conflictual relationship with a form of authority. This is how the actors are positioned when the public enters. It's important you should know we're on the Museum of National Contemporary Culture in Bucharest is in the Palace of Parliament. So we're playing exactly where Uranus neighborhood used to be. Over there on the right is a huge church that Romanian government built and stole a lot of money to build. So they're playing in between, I think, two very important landmarks of corruption and whatever's bad and rotten with Romanian government. In this first scene, for example, we're playing a scene about a couple, an old couple that was kicked out of that Uranus neighborhood I was telling you about earlier when they were demolishing the neighborhood. And these are true stories. There were people who were getting kicked out so that the Palace of Parliament could be built. I don't want to explain every single scene. I'm just trying to give the example of characters being in a conflictual relationship with a form of authority. Sometimes they're in conflict with the state. Sometimes they're in conflict with God. It depends on the scene. But we didn't structure in any way what we were doing. And I cannot stress this enough. We just had fun, and we let each other propose whatever we wanted. This is my favorite scene. And I think, we've been playing this performance for a year, almost a year. And it's a performance, this is the scene where everyone dances that I was telling you about earlier. It's a scene, it's a performance that's very loved by the audience. I put this picture here not to simply show that everyone was here in spite of bad weather, just to be proud of myself for no reason. I'm showing this picture because audience has huge love for this performance, and I'm still, after a year, I cannot explain to myself why. Because we played this performance outside, even in December, even in minus, 10 degrees, and people still came to see the performance. And I haven't found any rational reason as to why this is happening. I don't know why people love this performance so much. The only reason, the closest answer that I got to something that would satisfy me is, I think they felt just the honesty that we worked with, because we had no expectations. The money that I mentioned disappeared at some point. We had the premiere without any money. We didn't sell tickets, and we bought every piece of the costume and everything. from our own pockets. And we played that performance like that for a few months, losing money every time we performed it. Then after some time, we got some other financing, and that's where we had money to build this tent and have those, I don't know the word in English for those. We use them to get warm in winter time. You understand what they are. I think that's the only reason that explains why people come to this performance, even in -degree weathers. It's because they feel that there's something honest there, and they feel that it's something generous. The only answer I gave myself when we started working on this performance was, I want to make a performance that makes people feel less lonely. And this was the only interest that I had. I didn't want to make a performance about anything. And I still couldn't tell you what this performance is about. But its intention is to make people feel a bit less alone and a bit more as they belong to a community, even if that community exists only for 1 hour and 40 minutes. And this is the bad example. This is a performance. It's done with the same people. The performance is entitled The Death and Life of Bula. Bula, I have to give context again. Bula is our most famous character from Romanian jokes. And Romanian jokes are awful. They're racist, they're homophobic, they're everything that can be wrong with the world is present in Romanian jokes. And we had this idea to make a performance that kind of tries to deconstruct Romanian humor and why Romanian humor is like this, while tricking people that they're coming to see a comedy and they will have fun and laugh, when actually they come to see like this extremely political, in-your-face performance that's meant to upset you. And it didn't upset the audience, it upset us because we couldn't agree on common ground. I was extremely adamant on making a performance that shocks. Not just for the sake of shocking, but for trying to show people, if you put on stage what happens in those jokes, you don't look at those jokes as funny anymore. You look at those jokes as something awful and horrible. But it was not just about humor for me. It was about Romanian culture in general. But the difference between the previous performance I showed you and this performance that I'm talking about right now is the idea was not collectively agreed upon. I had this idea back home. I met all of my friends, all of my collaborators, and I told them I want our next performance to be like this. And they said okay because they trust me, but it was not a performance that they felt it belonged to them. And this is something that I feel can be shown, maybe not in photos right now, but it's something that I feel people realize when they come to see it. Because we didn't, and I think you can, maybe even from the pictures, you can see it's had completely different purpose. That purpose was not made, I did not think of that, the reason that I'm making this performance as a gift. I thought that I'm making this performance to forcefully change something in my country. I don't think I managed to do that. I don't think trying to change something in your country should be done, in my own country at least, should be done with the tools and energy that I came to with rehearsals. Because we had a lot of disagreements. We had a lot of conflict. No one screamed, no one insulted anyone, but we couldn't agree on how this performance should be like. Actors refused to say certain lines. We had to compromise a lot. We had to delete entire scenes because we were not trying to work from common ground. And this includes myself. I don't want to blame my team for we didn't manage to work healthily in this process because my team didn't try to look for common ground. I didn't try to look for common ground with them, and they didn't try to look for common ground with me. And I think, process of this performance also lacked a lot of collective responsibility that I was talking about earlier. Because there were conflicts and there were moments where someone in this rehearsal process tried to make a decision and other people in the team did not react to that decision. Although later, of course, we finished, we had a premiere, we took like 10 days of not seeing each other so that we calmed down, and then we met and we gave feedback to each other and talked, and things are fine, we're friends again. But it took a long time to get coherent opinions being spoken by everyone in the team. Because there were a lot of people who either didn't care or simply didn't want to add their opinion. They thought maybe we should just rehearse and get this over with. But I think this is because, as I said earlier, this is a performance that they don't feel it belongs to them as much as it belonged to me. I think it was something that I insisted to do, and because we're also very close as friends, they accepted to do it. But I don't think if they didn't know the director before, they would have accepted to do this performance. I like, this is my favorite photo from this because the character has a Romanian flag on his ass. And these are just pictures. But this for me was, I think, maybe the worst working process that I've been through. And that's, I think, 60% my fault. Because I did not apply anything that I talked about earlier. It was not in my mind. What was in my mind was the obsession to finish this performance at all costs. And this is applause, so you can imagine the energy that I gave off as a director to everyone else in the audience. Do we still have time? What time it is? 30 minutes left. Great. Let's have Q&A session for 30 minutes now. If there's questions. If there's not questions, I can improvise and keep talking.
Чи могли б повторити назву книгу Ніцше?
It's Nietzsche and the Vicious Cycle.
Thank you.
Wanted to ask, how do you assess that the performance was a failure?
I didn't say the performance was a failure. I think the performance is very good. But I think the process was very bad. The way we worked, the way we communicated with each other, the way we were showing up to rehearsals, especially in terms of comparison with the previous one where we spent hours working together and we didn't look at time and we didn't care that we were not making money for that performance. In this one, people in the theater we were working at, they felt something was wrong. The theater manager at one day came to me and she said, "What's wrong with you all?" Because technicians came to me and said, "There's something wrong with these people. They don't look at us. They don't talk to anyone. They go rehearse and then they leave." So I think the way we ended up making a performance that yes, of course, I think it's very good. The way we ended up making it was too big of a cost. If you would ask me, knowing what everything that I know now, if I still want to make that performance, I would say no. I prefer keeping my relationships with these people intact and not having to rebuild them than to make this performance that, of course, audience likes the performance. I've heard good things about the performance. I think what I proposed to myself worked and it happened. But I think the cost was too big because I could have lost people that I care about.
Ви багато говорили про те, що для того, щоб зробити гарний проєкт, треба підібрати адекватних людей, з якими буде комфортно працювати. І мені було цікаво, яким чином ви робите відбір, коли дивитесь на кастингу, наприклад, на людей, і розумієте, що вау, це людина, з якою буде добре працювати. Бо часто бувають випадки, коли людина добре себе показує, але потім в команді вона абсолютно не може співпрацювати.
This is why I don't usually do castings. If I have a choice, I refuse to cast actors because I don't feel comfortable with it. I feel very uncomfortable. I think if actors wouldn't be uncomfortable in a casting process, they would see how uncomfortable I am when casting. I think the power imbalance, like you said, you feel that you want that person to like you. You want that person to give you the project. So you act like a team player, but you're not necessarily a team player, is something that can fool you. And I had experiences like this where the person I like the most in a casting process and that I was most excited about turned out to be the worst person, as not as professionalism or talent, but as healthy working relationship. And that person didn't stay in the performance until the end. Of course, there are moments where you're forced to have a casting, and I'm sorry, but I think the answer I will give you is very incomplete. You just have to hope for the best and trust your stomach. Because first time, of course, the first few times you might make bad decisions, and these decisions will hurt, and you will remember them forever. They won't hurt forever, but you will remember them forever. And by remembering them forever, you will know that the next decision that you make when you have to cast people or choose adequate people, you will have more experience with that. You can also ask around if there's people that know that person. For example, I had a very good casting process when we started working here in Jam Factory, but because every person that I talked to was recommended by someone else. It was not an open casting, and people just came, and I had to figure out by myself if they're a person I can trust or not. My colleague Lyuba, she's very good at what she does. She's a very good creator, and she carefully selected a list of people and I liked all of them. I couldn't cast all of them, so I made like classic director choices, who's better for this role, and so on and so forth. But this was with huge help. And a lot of times you can ask for help. Even if you're in a theater, this is something Katie Mitchell writes about when she talks about soft skills. When you're in a theater in which you haven't worked before, maybe you're somewhere you don't know people and you can't ask, maybe you can find someone from that theater you can feel that you can trust that's not directly responsible for your casting process, and then you can ask that person, how is this one, how is that one, how do they understand each other, how do they get along? But there's no definite answer. You can just do like me and not do casting and work with the same people until they get bored to work with you.
Скажіть, будь ласка, я так зрозуміла, що імпровізація з'являється, велике місце має на початку, на етапі створення вистави. А коли вже з'являється якийсь текст, якісь рішення, скільки там вже в готовій виставі лишається місця для імпровізації у вас? Дякую.
I think that depends a lot on what the team needs and what the performance needs. Because there are processes where you need a lot of precision in the performance that you're working on. And in those processes, but this is something that happens from case to case. I don't think there's a general rule that you decide upon. I think there's moments where you need improvisation. There's moments where you can tell the performer that you're working with, you'll talk to the audience, see what happens. Maybe there's certain concrete points that you know they have to guide the audience through, but the text is not properly concretely agreed upon. But I know I have to hit point A in the story and then point B, but from point A and point B, the road is unclear. There's moments where A, B, C, D, E, F, and the entire alphabet have to be extremely precisely agreed upon. And there's moments where you just have an idea or a feeling, and for 30 minutes, the performer just does what they feel that they should do. But this depends a lot on the capacity that the performer has to improvise. Sometimes, in my experience, at least in Romania, there's actors who are not comfortable with this much freedom on stage, because it's a difference of opinion. I think anything that happens on stage is theater, but there are people who say that if I don't have a very clear role, if I have to play myself, if I don't know what's happening, if I don't have actions that we carefully agreed upon, then this is not theater anymore, this is performance art. And that's, of course, an opinion. I can disagree with that opinion, but it depends a lot on how that performer was trained. As I'm talking about actresses or actors generally. If it's different types of performers, then if I think maybe for choreographers I might be wrong. Maybe for choreographers, freedom of movement, because the body is something you listen to and you work with differently than with the brain. Freedom of movement can be something that comes easier than for an actor that was trained in a conventional acting school. I don't know if I answered your question.
Ви сказали в вашому першому прикладі перформанса, що він дав можливість людям відчути себе менш самотніми. І моє питання, яким чином, тобто, що було такого в перформансі, що вони відчули себе менш самотніми?
That's a good question. I think the relationship between the performers, the actors, and the audience is they're very careful with the way they treat the audience in this performance, and they're very warm in the way they address the audience. It's a performance in which we talk to the audience a lot. We dance with the audience. There's a lot of public interaction that actors have, and I think it's the care that they put in treating those people. I think they're paying a lot of attention to see if a person wants to be interacted with or not. I think the audience feels trust. I hate performances. I'm a very anxious person, as you've probably seen. And when I go to performances as an audience member and there's interaction with the audience, I am terrified that they will speak to me. When I make performances, I always make the actors talk to the audience. But I think something that's, in the performances I have seen, something that's very ignored is the way this interaction happens with the audience. Because me, when I'm on stage as a performer, it feels like I have more power than an audience member. And I have to make that audience member understand we're speaking from the same level. There's no wrong answer you can give. There's no wrong movement that you can give, because this performance is here so that you can belong with it. And at the end, there's also a very concrete answer. At the end, instead of applause, we try to take everyone, because we're playing on the roof, and we start depending on when the sun sets. Usually we get the sun to set exactly when the performance is finished, and instead of applause, we try to make everyone stand up and watch the sunset together. And there's always 10 minutes where we watch the sunset, start talking to strangers, and being somewhere and doing the same thing with people, even if you don't know them, sometimes makes your heart beat with the same rhythm as other people do. Other people's, yeah.
Якщо б ви робили знову виступ про Булу ще раз, що б ви змінили? Бо ви точно зробили якісь висновки.
Actually, we will remake it. I don't know what yet. We will remake it. I don't know yet exactly what we will change because we'll start remaking it in October, November. I think I would make sure that everyone feels comfortable with what's going on stage. One of the biggest problems that we had in the rehearsal process in this version of Bula was the fact that there were people who were not comfortable, and we did not accept that as a given fact. We tried to negotiate the comfort that they had with what was happening on stage. And I would change the relationship that the team has with the material we work with before anything else. If that means using completely different words or using completely different actions or changing set design, sorry, Cosmin, then I would do that. But I would make sure that everyone loves the performance as much as I do this time.
Чи не думаєте ви, що спроба компромісу навпаки погіршила кінцевий результат?
It depends. If you see it as a compromise, then yes. But a compromise exists only when I want something and you want something completely different, and either we agree or we stop doing the performance, which is what happened twice with Bula. And then, yes, I saw those decisions that I had to make as compromises. We have an entire scene at the end that did not happen, and instead of that scene, we recorded a monologue spoken by the dramaturg where he says, we were supposed to have a scene here where some things happened. We can say what happened because not all of us agreed that this scene should exist. So instead of this, you will have me talking about the fact that the only thing that keeps us together in this performance is that we want to make the performance. We couldn't agree on anything else. And I hated that scene with all my heart, and I still hate it. If I remember it, I hate it because I feel like it's a 100% compromise. But this was because me and the person, it was just one other person that refused to have that scene that doesn't exist. We didn't try to find something that we didn't try to find common ground. We didn't try to look in the same direction. She wanted it to be like she wanted it to be, and I wanted it to be like I wanted it to be. And none of us gave up on anything. So then, yes, it ended up like a compromise. But if you start and try to maintain, of course, not always. There will be days when it will be impossible. If you try to constantly maintain the fact that we're working on something that's more important than each individual person here. It's something that's beyond us. It's something that's greater than us. It's something that we all care about and we all agreed upon in the beginning. Then there won't be such compromises. I hope.
Добрий день. У мене не скільки питання, скільки прохання. Чи могли б ви розказати ваш улюблений анекдот?
My favorite Romanian joke?
Yep. Ta.
This is a very weird position you put me in, because if I say a joke and no one laughs, it will be awful, not just for me, for everyone here. So I have to choose a very good joke. Let me think.
Він може бути не смішний. Ну, я буду сміятись.
Okay, you promise. Okay. I'll tell you, am I allowed to swear? Okay. So we're at the zoo. And there's a problem because a gorilla in the zoo is fucking everyone. Other animals, people hired in the zoo, people who come to see the animals in the zoo, the gorillas fucking everyone. And at some point, the team of the zoo, the employees of the zoo, they have a meeting trying to find a solution. And they talk for a lot of time, and they can't find any solution. And hours pass, and everyone's angry, and they're sweating, and they're looking down. And at some point, someone gets up and says, okay, I have this solution. I didn't want to choose it, but fine. I have this friend. I can call him, and he will come help us. And they call the friend, and the friend comes to the zoo, and he says, okay, 3 rules. 1, 1,000 euro. 2, no kissing. 3, if it ends up with children or something, I don't want to take care of that. And then he thinks a bit and then says, and one more thing, that 1,000 euro, can I pay it to you in fragments? This was my first intellectual public lecture. And this is recorded.
Дякую, ви зробили мій день краще набагато. Правда.
You're welcome.
У мене було питання стосовно поведінки всередині колективу. І умовно, якщо все-таки всередині колективу є якісь деструктивні елементи поведінки, яких ти не можеш оминути, тобто вони є як факт, і ти повинен з ними працювати. Умовно, це про колектив, який ти наразі не можеш змінити. І ви згадували про існування системи, про покарання за погану поведінку і нагорода за хорошу поведінку. Я не дуже зрозуміла, чи це та форма системи, яка можлива, чи яку потрібно оминути. І якщо це та форма системи, яка можлива, то що для вас це покарання за погану поведінку і нагородження за хорошу поведінку? Дякую.
I was speaking of the general cultural artistic world when I talked about that system. But to answer your question properly, I think rules can be negotiated. And I do this whenever I start working with a team, even if it's the same team you saw that I constantly work on, or it's a new team. I do this every time. On the first rehearsal, we sit down and I say, okay, what are everyone's rules? And I say, for example, for me, it's important to blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And everyone gets to say what's important for everyone else, and then we can agree on consequences. Usually, what I do when things are not going according to the rules we all established, I go home. It's the least destructive thing I can do, and it's also very frustrating for the people who are there because the director leaves. So if people are late, I just leave. If people start screaming, I just leave, and I show up the next day, and we can discuss, and we can talk about what happened, what didn't happen. And I don't know, usually I say, okay, if I leave, it's like 3-strike rule. If I leave a 3rd time, then I'm never coming back to this performance. Probably I would come back because I want to finish my performance. Usually you sign contracts, so it's very hard to not come back. But I think creating a system where there's consequences to everyone's actions is something I encourage everyone to do. I mean, it's not the broad system I was talking about earlier, but I think this way of working, of negotiating what works and what doesn't work for everyone else, is something that should happen more often. Rewarding, I think, is more complicated, unfortunately. It feels weird to give candy to people when they show up on time or something, but I think you can simply acknowledge that a person was good. Or you can simply acknowledge that can be rewarding. You can say thank you for today, you can say thank you for showing up on time. You can say thank you for, I saw that you got angry in rehearsal and you didn't raise your voice. Thank you for that. And it can be more than, I mean, it can be more than enough. It feels like very little and it feels like it's very simple, but it can actually mean a lot. And you can just say, I tell Cosmin all the time that I appreciate working with him, and I'm very glad that he's my friend and also collaborator. And that is a form of reward. It's a reward just in language, but it is a form of reward in itself.
Чи є для вас якісь критерії, по яким ви обираєте акторів? Ви сказали, що іноді обмеження або якісь особливості є кращим і більш виграшним. Чи є якась система, за якою ви вибираєте людей, або ви йдете більше за тим, якою людину ви хотіли б бачити вже завчасно, і вибираєте під ці якості актора? Або вона може існувати так, як вона хоче, і чи залежить це від конкретної вистави? Чи є у вас якийсь базовий підхід, чи це відбувається також в вільній формі?
I want you to know I was not reacting the way I was reacting to what you were saying, because I have no idea what you were saying, because my headset is working very badly. So I will please remember what you asked. I promise I will answer you as best as I can, but can we make this, it doesn't work. I mean, it works, but I only hear.
I'll just translate it shortly. The question was what rules you follow. Again, what rules you follow choosing actors for work. Is their personality the main thing you pay attention to?
I think it's 70%. The personality. Of course, if you see someone that is good, you will want to take that person. But if I choose someone to work with, I will spend a few minutes talking to that person. And I will pay a lot of attention to how I feel during that discussion, during that conversation, and how that person behaves. Even before starting, let's say they prepared a monologue, and they have a few seconds, few minutes to prepare before starting. If you pay attention to that, you can understand a lot about a person. It's not a rule that everyone has to follow. Everyone likes different kind of artists, and that's perfectly okay. I like fragile people. I like people who are they have their souls in your hand, and they risk having those souls hurt because they give them to you when they act or when they create something. And this is something that I really like. But of course, it depends a lot on what the performance needs and how you feel about that person. Does that answer your question? But in a way that you like it's a good answer? Okay.
У нас є час для одного останнього запитання. We have time only for one last question, and it goes to Danilo.
По-перше, хотів сказати, що дуже було приємно сьогодні бути на цій лекції. Це дуже було корисно і цікаво. Я дуже під враженнями залишився. Тут чекав, яке можу питання задати. І от хотів поцікавитися просто, чи практикуєте ви якісь тренінги, може, якісь методології з своїми артистами, щоб вони були там більш органічними, не знаю, щоб вони підвищували свій рівень гри. І от таке питання. Дякую.
I come from a school, in Romanian theater school, does not have a proper methodology. We have a lot of things that other professors understood and made it their own. So it's like a soup of a bit of everything that you can have. So we were not taught a certain methodology in school. We were encouraged by our professors, directing professors, to find our own. The one I like best is it's Declan Donnellan's, the one that he writes about in The Actor and the Target, which is something that I also applied and what I was talking about earlier, about always thinking of the outside, always thinking about someone else. It's a book. You can find it even online. You download it for free. And it's a pretty good book. And this is what I usually use. It's always about what's outside, and it's always about something active. But I don't think this is something that only Declan Donnellan invented. That's why I'm not saying it's necessarily a methodology. I think this is in theater work in general. But it's always about the outside, and it's always about being active. This is why it's called the actor and the target. It's about a target that I work with, and there's a verb that I have to attach to that target. It doesn't have to be passive. But this is the most methodological thing that I apply. In general, I simply work with the way that the actors are trained to work. Is that a good answer? Okay, I can accept that. I'm not good with theory.
Ну, я думаю, що в цьому саме принципі створення вистав devising тут і грає на руку те, що кожен може зробити щось унікальне, непередбачуване. Так чи ні?
Maybe this is something good that each actor has his unique methodology or method of work, and maybe because of that they can put something unique into process. Is it true or not? Do you agree with it?
I agree with that, and depending on what the performance needs. I think there's performances where you can, for example, this performance I mentioned about Hungarian and Romanian actors, there's very different schools and there are very different ways of training them. And it was supposed to be a performance about the difference of culture that we have, how that feels for us, being like sharing the same city. And then it worked. I think if you do something where everything has to feel together, when we need to feel togetherness from the collective as a whole, then it's not necessarily working. I think there's no concrete, there's no universal rule. You apply what works best for what you need. And what you need is a sensation, and you try to make that sensation happen with every step that you take and from every direction that you can take. Set design, the way actors perform on stage, music, text, colors, everything. Okay, I'm shutting up. Thank you. Do we have time for my thing? Yes? Okay. I want to leave you with a short manifesto. I wrote it last night, and I like it. And I hope you will like it as well, and I hope it will help you if you need help. I'll read it so I don't say any mistake. And it's translated already over there. Do you want me to move again? Yes? Form collectives. Be okay to have no idea what you're doing. Learn to express yourself. Break free of unhealthy behavior. Be independent of outside opinions. Listen to your stomach. Grow until you start contradicting your mentors, then help others grow until they start contradicting you. Work with love. Work for others. Be honest. Break the rules. Celebrate. and hope for the best. Thank you.